Okay, welcome everyone. We're excited that so many of you actually showed up this morning. It's Sunday. We thought people would be out of town or at brunch, so we hope to make today as exciting as possible. The title of what we'll be talking about today is the phenomenon of gaming and its relationship to anxiety and depression. So we're hopeful that today is going to be much more interactive and we have slides prepared, but we really want to open up and really talk about kind of gaming in a bigger sense. So our main goal today is to pique your curiosity about gaming in a very holistic sense. We have a couple of disclosures to make. So I'm Carolyn Rubenstein. I'm a shareholder in Esports Now, which is a competitive video gaming organization. And my main role is to advise the organization on the infrastructure related to player mental health. So with the professional teams having sports psychologists and well-being for the professional gamers. And we'll get into a little bit more about that later on as well. My co-speaker here, Dr. Avery-Peck, Gabby, is also a performance consultant, and she consults with gamers as well as the sports psychologists and sports therapists on the ground with two different teams. So the Misfits organization, which is a League of Legends team, as well as the Florida Mayhem, which is a professional Overwatch team. And if you don't know what those are, I promise you by the end you will. So get ready to learn a lot of lingo. And just one more call out. I'm going to have Ben Spoon, who's actually best known as my husband, but also as another role. He's in the back, so you can kind of turn around. He's being shy right now, but he is our expert here on gaming. So he is the CEO and owner of Esports Now and runs multiple organizations, the Florida Mayhem, Misfits Gaming, and he is on the ground, knows the players, knows gaming, works with from 14 years old all the way up to with gamers. So you'll be able to also, if you have questions that are specific to that, he is here to answer your questions, and he is ready to be grilled. So we are ready. So we thought we would start out with trying to figure out kind of where we all stand in terms of your thoughts on gaming at the beginning of this presentation. So our first question, have you played a video game in the last month? Raise of hands. Yeah, wow, awesome, okay. Yeah, definitely more than expected. Anyone want to share which video game they played? Ooh, okay, Just Dance. Who else? Come on. Yeah. Fortnite. And many more. Paw Patrol's your favorite. Yeah. Okay. How about this one? Who thinks that the internet gaming disorder should be included as a diagnosis in the DSM-5? Yeah. Okay. So a lot of hands. And if you guys don't know too much about that, we're going to go into a little bit more detail about what they're proposing as the criteria for that as well.
My background is in sports psychology, so I have a master's degree in sports psychology, and so I started my clinical work working with athletes who were expected to play their sport for 5 to 7 hours per day, and that it was considered to be unhelpful to them if they did something else. And so even is that our judgment about what what video games are versus regular sports, and all things that kind of what we're going to end up with is that we don't have a lot of research to help us to understand whether it's just another generation, whether we're just moving past and have to shift our thinking about these things.
So I think our idea of video games, I pulled this picture from a video that we're going to watch. It's just a couple of minutes, but I think it's a really good look at how video gaming has really just blossomed into this new being that we can't ignore anymore. But when we think about video gaming, this is usually what we think of, right? We think of a video game player in a isolated room without any sound coming from external sources, no sunlight, and kind of blocked out from the outside world. And I want to kind of show a different image of that as well. The goal here is just to increase curiosity.
Have you guys seen esports and the E-League? I don't know if that's sports. But it's a crazy concept.
But I don't know if athlete is the right word that I would go for.
Don't bring a sweat. I don't consider it a sport.
No, you do.
Watching people play video games isn't like watching people play football. It's like watching people play fantasy football. It is one more step removed from human activity. You understand?
It's video games. It shouldn't be on a sports network. It's video games.
But can it truly be a spectator sport?
It already is. 71 million watched it last year. They reckon it's going to, by 2017, it'll be 145 million people watching it.
They're actually giving college scholarships for
Video gamers?
For video gaming. And it's even gone to the point that now the government has acknowledged professional video gamers as athletes.
Same way you watch a football match, you can hear the crowd, everyone's cheering the team on, you make friends, these are people you talk to, you play with online. It's all about community, it's being part of something that you're incredibly passionate about.
Running for Verigo right now, trying to establish vision control and portal. And he's
seeing that they're all together in the Coliseum watching, because that's actually very social and anxiety provoking, and they're all there. And I know I've had children of clients, save their money to go to one of these things, and it's a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best elements of this that I've seen with and we'll go over later on a case vignette with a social anxiety element as well, and then we'll be able to speak to some of this as well, but there is a huge element of this that is bringing in where there are meetups where players will come together at local restaurants and watch the games together. And so you'll be able to watch it in your local town. You won't have to go to these big arenas to watch it. So they're starting to incorporate a very social element to being able to meet people and get from outside of the computer. And it breaks down a lot of barriers for a lot of kids that normally wouldn't connect with other people. And so I think in that regard, that's a tremendous positive that we can look to kind of boost. But it doesn't take away obviously from the other side, but it is another element that I wanted to introduce here and make sure that we're all kind of thinking about that part as well. So we have a brief overview, and our goal here is hopefully not to go through too much of these slides to kind of keep the discussion going, which we love, because we really think that this is a huge area that we want to kind of brainstorm and think through together as clinicians and researchers and individuals to kind of really think through what are the key issues right now and the key concerns and where do we need to go in the next steps, because we've really been stuck in one place. And so we're going to first take you through just a history of gaming, some basic stats and numbers, and then just some general lingo about the genres and ratings regarded to the gaming, and give you some key resources with that as well. And then a brief overview about the research on the latest psychological findings. We have a huge reference list as well on the ADAA website, so we uploaded that there as well with all of the articles, so you can see all of that as well there. And then talking about some case vignettes, we'll provide some of our own and would love to hear some of your own and kind of think through it together. And then discuss further implications for researchers and clinicians, talking a little bit about the DSM-5, the possible criteria, some assessment tools and things like that. And then we'll kind of provide you with a lot of different resources related to websites, treatment resources, and key researchers in this area. Okay. So Gaming 101, I feel like we have a much more game savvy group here than I realized, so this question is going to be pretty easy, I think. Which of these is Fortnite? A, B, C, or D? C? C. All right. Anyone else think C? Yeah? You don't know? Not a lot of people know? Okay, so maybe not as savvy as I thought. It's okay, I really probably would not have known myself as well, but until a little bit ago, until I was immersed in this world, but you're correct. So C is Fortnite, A is League of Legends, D is Overwatch, and B is Super Smash Brothers. All right, so the history of gaming. So competitive gaming is usually associated with the release of networked first-person shooting games. So the first one was Doom in 1993, and we're going to show you a brief clip of that really quickly. And it's really kind of the first, called the first one because players were able to play online in online tournaments together in groups called clans. And I believe Doom is still around somewhere. In my husband said in cults, right? Cults are playing this, or he's going to get a lot of Twitter backlash for that when he shares this video. So maybe not. He wants to take that back. But then in 1997, there was the creation of the Cyber Athlete Professional League, and so that was developed to really model the major professional sports leagues. That is no longer, I think that kind of went out in 2008, but really kind of brought up that idea of professional esports athletes. Yeah.
I'm really not familiar with this. What does that mean, a network first-person shooting game?
Okay, so I think, Ben, you want to answer that for us in gaming lingo terms here?
Yeah, sure. Just mean, it used to be back in the day that when you play a video game, right, it's a very localized experience. You buy a game from the store, you go home, you play it in your house with your siblings on your own. But then starting in around 1993, when the internet came about, you started seeing games being designed differently, meaning you could be playing at your house, but you could be playing against someone somewhere else. So networked in that sense just means connected to the internet. And first-person shooter just means sort of the viewpoint of how you're looking at the game as you're playing it. So it's first person versus third person, omniscient, it's first person, so you're seeing.
And I'm going to show you a clip of Doom so you can actually see it, because I'm a visual person, so I need to see the game to understand it. So we'll see that as well in a second.
And I think the purpose of going through some of this history is that we already talked a little about, like, maybe this is just a generational thing, maybe things are different now, but as you can see, these games have existed for a long time, and it's a little bit unfortunate that the research hasn't moved along as quickly as we have. So, esports teams are not new, it's just the popularity of them has grown exponentially over the last few years.
Yeah, and I think the thing that has really blossomed and grown is that it's really grown from just you playing at home, on your own, to then being able to play with people, a city over, now a country over, a continent over, to now going to stadiums and watching people play. So it's really introduced this idea of professionals and fans and this idea of a real sport. So it's really kind of transformed over the years and really kind of blossomed with the development of Twitch. And so Twitch is where, as most of you have kind of alluded to, is where you can watch players while they're play the game. And I'll show you a clip of that as well, of Ninja, who's probably the most well-known streamer. He's a Fortnite player, and he'll be playing on Twitch, and he talks to the viewers as he's playing. So you get a feel of like you're communicating with these semi-celebrities, but it's introduced this idea of streaming and professional streamers in addition to professional gamers. So there's really a lot of different avenues of gaming now. Okay, so this is just to give you a brief kind of visual look. So starting with Doom and kind of the full house view. She's playing at home. Looks like Super Nintendo on the couch alone. And then it's evolved into what we can see on the bottom right here, where players are playing on the stage. So they're playing on the stage the game, and the fans are in the arena watching. And I've gone to a few of these now, and I've been to one in Madrid, Spain that was absolutely incredible, as well as Madison Square Garden. So these are happening all over the place in huge arenas and are sold out almost instantaneously. So this is not something that we can kind of say it happens in these back arenas and things like that. These are huge events.
And what's interesting from a sports psychology perspective too is that video gamers were not used to this experience either. So even though they were used to being watched by millions of people, they were not used to being watched by millions of present people. And so that experience of playing a video game on stage with people like right next to you, and even the people you're playing with right next to you, is a very different experience than playing in the comfort of your own home.
Yeah, and they don't have much time to adjust. So usually they're plucked from kind of, their homes, and then they're on stage. So it's very quick, that evolution, and you don't have time. It's almost like American Idol, where you go right up and you have to evolve pretty quickly. And you can kind of watch these players evolve over time, and because most of them are streaming throughout, you're able to watch the evolution, which is pretty awesome. And this is some footage of Twitch. So I thought rather than watch a boring footage, we'll add in some Ellen, get a couple of laughs in here. And this should give you a pretty good idea of what Twitch is like.
Twitch, hey, remember when last week Ninja taught me how to play Fortnite?
Yes.
The video of me learning how to play Fortnite was trending #3 on YouTube. Ninja is the master of Fortnite. I found out that almost 350 million people have watched him play, and I want to tap into that market, so I'm going to live stream Ninja playing Fortnite behind me. Ninja, are you there?
Hi, yes.
Hi, Ninja.
Hi, Ellen.
How's it going? What are you doing? Are you doing a lot of dancing and killing right now?
So I'm actually looking at a llama right now. So no dancing and no killing. It's a little machete. Oh my gosh. Oh,
don't hurt the llama. Why do you want to hurt the llama?
The llama is now dead. So it spawned a bunch of balloons and stuff like that, and someone just tried to throw a grenade at me.
No, don't let him do it to you. Look at you.
I won't.
Don't look how fast you're running too. That's great. Now where are you headed? What's happening? And how? By the way, no, don't answer that. I have another question.
Okay. I have an answer.
How much money did we make when we were playing? And where's my cut?
I don't know if I can tell you. No, we made a lot. It'll be in your Swiss bank account by tomorrow.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, now what are you hanging on to there? What's happening?
So this is a glider that recently came out. It's pretty cool. It's got there's like a little guy inside. Basically, it just lets me float around wherever I need to go. Yeah.
Right. Well, don't drop yet. There's water. You want to drop on that golf course that you're above.
Yeah, here we go. Oh, the golf course is back. No, it's in the storm, but I might be able to swing a couple rounds. You can actually golf in the game, right?
Can you golf in this game?
Yeah. Look. Yeah. Look.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Are you changing to
literally anything?
What's happening? Wow! You can play golf. I didn't know that. How many people are watching you right now? Do you know?
I think live viewers. I think 50 or 60,000.
50 or 60,000 are watching you and watching me.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing.
Yes.
They're watching you and they're watching me. We're going to just leave you up there the entire time. And whether people are tuning in to watch you or me, the important thing is they're watching me. All right, Ninja, you just keep playing, and I'll keep you up in the background, okay?
All right, awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, I'll see you in a minute. Well, you'll see.
Yeah.
I'll see you the whole time.
I'll see you. Yeah.
All right, just stay up there.
Okay. So that was a pretty good kind of introduction into the world of Twitch. Any reactions to Twitch or Doom and kind of?
Yeah, I can see why Twitch is addictive.
You can?
Yes.
Why? What did you see that?
It's very engaging.
Yeah. Because you have the players, you can see the player, and a lot of them have big personalities, the big ones, and so they're talking and they're interacting, and
they'll talk with you.
You can chat with them. It's pretty amazing. But yeah, you can get pretty engrossed. That's why they make a lot of money doing that, those professionals. So you definitely want to watch how much time, but a lot of kids also will start streaming themselves and find their persona doing that and kind of grow a sense of, develop a much bigger sense of confidence from that, which is pretty remarkable to see.
What I also like about that video is I think we all get the sense, video games as violent, right? So they're talking about, the llama's dead, I killed the llama, or, I'm taking my grenade. But when you are watching it, it's this cartoony kind of fun thing. You know, the llama is multicolored, he doesn't look dead. And so we'll talk also about the different types of video games and the ratings of these video games, but this is a teen, that's rated teen, right? So Fortnite is rated teen, so you think something where the ultimate goal is to kill all the other people in the game that you're in, that's the point of Fortnite, is actually a teen-rated game because it's lighthearted, right? It's comical type of thing. And so what are our reactions to that, and how video games are assessed, and the implications for playing what's considered a violent video game, but is it violent if, you know, it's tie-dye colored and you can play golf with a machete? I don't know.
Yeah. So I have a question with the definition of gamer. So the average female gamer is 37, the average male gamer is 33. What is the determination?
So for this one, I think it was they played video games a certain number of hours per week, and I don't think it was many. So I think it was they had to play at least, like, I think 3 to 5 was a gamer. So these aren't professionals. These are just kind of more recreational gamers, and this was a pretty broad survey done in 2017.
But that highlights a bigger problem, which is how are we assessing what it means to be a gamer, and also what it means to be playing like video games too often. So we're going to look at some of the studies that sort of establish, well, if it's between 1 to 4 hours, you're cool, but as soon as you hit 5 to 7, well, then that's problematic. And what does that look like? Are you playing alone? Are you playing with people watching? And we don't do a good job of assessing it in that way.
Well, and what's counting as a game in that? I mean, is playing Sudoku on your tablet counting?
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. That's a puzzle game. Yep. Yeah. I love Sudoku, so I would count here.
Right, it's another problem when you think of clients who come to you clinically and they sit down and say, like, well, I play video games. Do we have a different evaluation of like what's normative and what's okay if it's Sudoku on their computer for 3 hours versus Fortnite with their friends, versus I have a bunch of kids that play Roblox and they like build stuff and things like that, and do I perceive that to be a better option because it's not violent, although there's scary spiders in that game too, right? So the research has not caught up to all of those differences, similar to the way it hasn't really in sports either, in terms of what makes someone an expert and performance-related things and things like that.
But I think that idea that you brought up originally about gamer and the terminology, as we'll see throughout, is there's not much consistency at all in the terminology. So we'll use gamer lightly here, but even when we go into the assessments that have been created, there are so many different terms used to assess gaming, and excessive or pathological or too much or problematic. And so immersive, there's a lot of different terms that I'll kind of give you as well. And all of this will be up on the ADA website. We put up a preview version, but we'll put up the full version as well. So all this will be there for you to see. But so this slide here really shows this is not just something for teens. So pretty much we can see here, it looks like it's stacked before 35, but then we're seeing kind of after 50, there's another increase in gaming, which is interesting. And it's something that is pretty well documented. There's a kind of a boom here after 50 of people becoming more engaged in gaming. Why? We don't know. There's not many answers here. But it's not something just that we need to look at for adolescents and teenagers, where most of the focus has been and should still probably remain, since that is where we want to focus, especially prevention efforts with addiction. So, but if you look here, we're seeing that females and males are playing at pretty almost, they're not equivalent. Males are definitely playing more, but females are playing at a pretty high percentage as well. So it's not negligent. The average female gamer is a little bit older, so it's 37, while the average male is about 33 years old. And this was a recent study, so 2017, 43% of American adults said they play video games. And most American teens play video games. I didn't even break down the percentages because they are so high. So if you look at the bottom chart here, 83% of girls say they play video games, 97% of teenagers say they play video games. I thought this chart here was interesting. So when asked teenage boys and girls how many of them think that they play too much, 41% of boys said they spend too much time playing, whereas 11% of girls say they spend too much time playing. So I thought that was an interesting kind of perception of how much they're playing, and be able to have that insight that they might be playing way too much time here. and may not be able to stop. So that is some insight, which could be some motivation for change and what brings them into our offices. So video game genres. So I'm going to kind of briefly go over this because we could go really in detail with this, which I'm not going to do because it's way too complicated. But the video game genres are, they're called, so it's a specific category of games related by similar gameplay characteristics. So they're not usually defined by the actual content of the game or its medium of play, but by its common challenge. So for example, in shooter games, they use a range of weapons to participate in the action. So that's what we just saw. So we saw Doom, they're using a first-person shooter game. The majority of the games that are being played are shooter games. So you can see here almost 28% are shooter games. And then action games where it's very action-oriented. But if you think about, so shooter games would be like League of Legends, Overwatch, some very, very popular games.
And important just to note that just because it's a shooter game, it doesn't mean that the goal in the game is to kill the most people. So something like Overwatch, the goal is to complete a task as a team, and along the way you're killing the other team so that you can complete the goal first. So it is also an interesting dynamic, like in Fortnite where the goal is last man standing. That's not the same with Overwatch where there is a common goal related to achieving something at the end that isn't just killing everyone.
And then there's role play games where you kind of are actually involved in the scripting of what's going on. So like Dungeons and Dragons or things like that that have different elements of play. And then sports, of course, like NBA 2K, Madden with football.
How many of you knew that the NBA teams now have associated esports teams? So about half. Yeah, there you go. About half of the NBA teams now have esports teams that play NBA 2K Live that have like funny names that are sort like the Heat or the Heat Check. So even the professional sports teams are recognizing that this is a field that they want to be a part of and are benefiting and profiting off of that too.
Yeah, so it's definitely becoming much more, and we were just talking about the Army also has an esports league that they're having. Yeah, so just started and is very, very popular. So the active military, I think it's active, are joining, and it's not easy to become a part of the league. So very competitive, and we'll probably see more from that as well. All right, so video game rating. So this is usually the reference and the resource that I provide first to parents and anyone who's kind of interested in finding out more about what is going on in the game. So figuring out like the rating of the game. So this is very similar. So the Entertainment Software Rating Board, the ESRB, is in America, and they provide the ratings much like we have ratings for movies. And so if you go to their website or they have an app now, you can really simply and quickly just type in the name of a video game and you'll get way more information than you ever thought possible, and it's really clear. And so you'll get the rating category, which provides age appropriateness. You'll get content descriptors, which is like what triggered the particular rating. If there's an interest or concern, it'll be noted there. And then the interactive elements I think is really important to look at as well, which is if there's any socialization in the game, but also from a security perspective, if they can, if your user location will be shared, things like that you want to be particularly mindful of. And these are the categories, so they range from early childhood, which is very few of the games, all the way up to adults only. The majority of the games are rated everyone, which is, I believe, 6 and older. But most of the games that we hear, Fortnite, Overwatch, even some of the Call of Duty games that I think we hear a lot in the news, are rated teen, which is 13 and older. So that is kind of concerning, in terms of how they define, how are these ratings being defined, and can we use just the rating, or how do we break it down even further to look at what makes it acceptable for this group of children versus this group, and so on. Any thoughts related to seeing these categories? Is this something new? Did you guys know this existed for video games? I see some shaking of heads, so you knew it existed. Anyone actually ever looked up the video game rating of a video game? No. Okay. So not similar. Yeah.
Can you give an example of one that's rated M that a lot of people are playing?
So if you, has anyone heard of Red Dead Redemption? So that is rated M. So I have watched someone play that and it's very violent. So I would say the difference between the mature games and the teen games is the almost like how realistic the violence is. So even something like Call of Duty, there's different versions of Call of Duty, some of which are teen and some of which are mature. And it seems, and Ben, maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, it seems like the difference in what's rated teen and what's rated mature is like the realisticness of the goal, right? And who you're killing and things like that. Yeah, go ahead.
We have a 17-year-old son, and I know when he would want M games, we would have to be present when he bought them. Is it the same for the other ratings, or?
Teen, no, I mean, as long as you're 13, you're good to go. But yeah, so the M games, you need a parent.
But what if like a 10-year-old was wanting a teen game? Is there any?
I doubt it. Right. And you also remember like things like Fortnite you're buying on the internet and things like that. So usually it's like click if you're 18 or older or whatever it is, and then you're good to go. So if you've ever, so Red Dead Redemption, things like that are very violent. The more sexualized games also tend to have the mature rating or the adults only rating. We were just sort of looking on the site to see like what could possibly have an adults only rating, and they seem to be just like sexual related themes.
Also, some of the Call of Duty versions do have an M rating, so I think it also has to do with like the amount of blood that's present in the game, which some of the versions of Call of Duty have a lot of blood, and so that's what made some M, but some teen. Yes, Ben?
No, I think people might find it interesting. So what some of the games actually do is, as gaming becomes much more mainstream, and it's also on TV, on TBS and ABC and Disney XD and Disney Channel, some of the games will have a blood-free viewing experience that they'll distribute on TV. So, for example, Call of Duty, while if you're playing Call of Duty at home and you shoot someone and it's bloody, if you're watching Call of Duty, the esport, the professional gaming, the professional tier, top tier, and you're watching that online, you won't see blood. So that's how they also can get, that's how they get around any of these ratings in order to get on TV.
And that's, so for me, that just leads back into, I'm going to move on to talk about some of the research, and starting with aggression, which to me is we don't have a good sense of if video games are correlated with aggression and aggressive behaviors, why is that the case, right? So if you have children watching, the clean version of the video games where there's no blood, is that the same as having a group of children watching the version where there is blood? And we have no idea because the research is not quite there yet. So just to start out with, why do video games get such a bad rap if, from everything we've seen so far, it seems kind of like a lot of fun, right? And I think they tend to get a bad rap is because we sensationalize those stories that are related to video games, and there are a lot of them. So when there's a school shooting or something happens, a lot of times you hear the stories of, they were playing violent video games, they were really immersed in that experience. And so that's what, the availability heuristic, that's what everyone goes to, that's what they can see in their head. But what really the findings are is that there definitely are studies out there that show a correlation between exposure and playing violent video games and negative actions such as aggressive behaviors. But there's methodological concerns, like there is in most research, in terms of most are only correlational. They can't show causation, and they limit what we can conclude. There's research that shows that time spent playing violent video games is associated with increases in aggression, and that greater competitive video game play predicted higher levels over time if you were controlling for aggression. But the problem with that is, again, video game play is only one risk factor to consider. Right? So when we're talking about aggressive acts and aggressive behaviors, the likelihood is that this kid is not just living in a vacuum where all he does is play video games. There's plenty other of factors that come into play. And so other research on aggression in video games sort of shows that in order for a typical or normal child to become seriously violent, he or she would have to have more than one risk factor than just playing video games. So we know that there are other risk factors for aggression, including poverty, pre-existing psychological concerns, drug use, media violence, things like that. And so there's no single risk factor that's typically strong enough to cause such an extreme behavior as a school shooting. It was mentioned early on, like, is it the right thing to limit video games on weekdays and only play during the weekend? Or does that send the message like this is not okay and is only just a reward type of thing, right? And does it teach tolerance and the ability to say like, well, if I have homework, I can delay and I can wait a few hours? And again, we just don't know yet, unfortunately, which is problematic for all of us.
And you'll hear us say that a lot throughout this. It's very frustrating, is we just don't know yet. And there isn't a huge sense of urgency within the research as well. So to find the research, it's intense. And that kind of, the research that I provided you in that document was pretty much took.
She said pretty much everything.
Yeah, okay. So I did take way too much time to obsessively look through all the literature to find every article ever published on video gaming, and there's not that much, which is scary. So there needs to be more research done, yes.
So why do you think the American Pediatric Association only recommends 2 hours of any electronic device per day?
So that's definitely something that comes up a lot in the research, yes.
Sorry, I was gonna say, because I did not see any research, because I've read that when they play, it increases the flow of dopamine in the brain, and I believe this is one of the things pediatricians limit this.
They're also rethinking their recommendation, which is interesting to talk about, but I don't want to get into a debate about that today. And we're not actually going to be talking so much about the brain today, so the neurological findings. So that is something that I'm going to touch on a little bit later, is that, so the only research that we have had is looking at the brain while they're playing, and that's really it. There really hasn't been anything in terms of psychology, which is what we wanted to kind of really find here, was looking at anxiety and depressive symptoms related to it, because in a real world setting, that's what we're seeing, and we don't know how to approach it.
What studies are you looking at?
Psychological studies. Yeah, so not in the medical journals. So we did not look at the fMRI studies and things like that, where there is more research, because you're better able to look at the brain while they're playing the video game, right? And so you're able to look at that. But even those studies are limited because you're only looking at certain types of kids that are playing these games, and the samples are not that large. And so there are concerns.
Hopefully, yeah, not yet. Hopefully, yeah. So the other types of negative associations, which I think many of you mentioned as concerns with your own clients, right, is that if you're playing video games, then you're not physically active, right? So more than 2 hours of video games per day is associated with insufficient physical activity, which was already mentioned, and it's time that you could have otherwise spent in physical activity. I think then the question becomes, would those kids have spent their time in physical activity? I have plenty of clients that don't play video games that I still can't get them to be physically active. Impact in sleep, so it was also mentioned the majority of video games being played takes place in the evening hours. In some ways that's because that's when everyone's free. It's also because video games and esports is now a world activity, and so if you're trying to play with the most possible number of people, you need to do it when everyone's awake. So depending on which side of the world you're on, you want to be awake for that. It's also been linked to poor sleep outcomes for adolescents when you've been using it before bedtime, but the experimental evidence for that is really sparse, and like Carolyn was saying, the sample sizes are really small. Typical to what they say about watching TV before you go to bed, video game usage increases your physiological arousal and cognitive alertness, which impairs your ability to fall asleep. But again, those studies are really small. And so we can argue with our clients that yes, these have a negative impact and how can we limit? And at the same time, we don't have enough information to confirm. Other areas, so there's a possible correlation with attention problems. So it seems like more children with ADHD play video games than their peers, and the gaming frequency has also been associated with other internalizing problems, which is what we're seeing with our clients. So depression, anxiety, and things like that. And one study sort of looked at how maladaptive coping mediated that relationship. So it begs the question, is it the video games that are leading to depression and anxiety, or is it an existing inability to cope with stressors that then makes it difficult and the video games exacerbate that? Or is it a client that's already struggling with depression and anxiety and so they look to video games as a way to cope? We just don't know. And the last one here is just that adolescent heavy gamers, again, but what does that mean to be a heavy gamer? I think this study meant greater than 5 hours a day, had more depressive symptoms than normative gamers, which was less than 5 hours a day. Would you like to talk about the positives of video games?
I would love to talk about the positives. Again, we don't know much. So our call to action here is we need more research and really good research done because even these studies are just not methodologically very sound. And I think we're both researchers, that's our background before going into clinical practice. And so when looking at it, it is concerning that the research is not that sound. So puzzle video games, there's lots of studies on that it can improve players' moods, promote relaxation, and reduce anxiety, so I can remain addicted to Sudoku, is what that means. But there has been more research on that, and I think that's just because it's more mainstream and much easier to study. There also have been emotion regulation benefits. So when you're playing video games, ruminating is not rewarded. And so you need to be able to kind of moderate and flexibly adapt to frustrating experiences pretty quickly. And so that can kind of teach, in some sense, a little bit of resiliency and dealing with frustration in that regard. So the games can elicit positive and negative emotions. And so we're seeing that kind of being able to adapt to the negative emotions was one positive outcome found with a sample of more depressed clients. And then a lot of the research, of course, has been done with adolescent boys. And one study found that adolescent boys that were not heavy players, so playing, let's say, 5 hours max, a week, so casual players had lower levels of anxiety, and the thought was that because of this increasing the social connectedness of playing video games with others. So all these kids were playing multiplayer games, so they were interacting with others. So when you see a headset on a kid playing a video game, they're talking to usually their friends playing at the same time. Augmented reality games, so like Pokemon Go, can promote physical activity, which we know is very, very important. So being able to kind of combine the video games with physical activity here is a plus, and there's a lot of studies on that. And I think the biggest positive that we've seen is online interactions and communities promote a sense of connectedness and belonging, which especially for adolescent boys can be a great way to decrease a sense of shame and isolation when dealing with difficult emotions. And I'll talk about one case where this was a huge source of comfort for kind of being able to connect with his peers in school through video games and talking about emotions while playing video games, which was pretty cool. Okay, so we have this question here. How do we determine healthy versus problematic video game usage? And I think we still have many more questions about this, this differentiating between healthy versus problematic video game usage. But going back to those initial scenarios that we talked about, we're going to kind of go through a few ways that have been presented to assess healthy versus problematic video game usage. And then we can kind of think through the scenarios together using maybe some of these assessment tools. Okay, so these are just a few of the assessment tools being used to operationalize gaming, and so how others in studies have looked at healthy versus problematic gaming or healthy versus unhealthy gaming. So there's really no consensus as to how to best measure the difference between it, and there's not many tools that have been like psychometrically evaluated, so we don't have as many measures that have been rigorously looked at. So it's oftentimes you create a scale that's was used in this study, then referenced in that study, and that study, and that study. But you never can actually find the original source and how this was created. And so this is a list of some of the scales available, and I was going to kind of go through a couple of them with you, but I don't want to bore you. So the Internet Gaming Disorder Scale I put first because it has been validated. It's had a few different studies that have validated it. There's a short form, which is 9 items, and there's a long form, which I believe is 21 items. So this one asks 9 questions, and they're answered using a 5-point scale, Likert scale, from 1 never to 5 very often. And it's really used to estimate the severity of internet addiction. So less so focusing on gaming, even though it says gaming disorder, it's more so using an internet addiction emphasis there. And then the computer engagement addiction scale we have, which I could never actually find to provide a copy of, but it is referenced quite a bit in terms of what is engagement versus addiction. And then we have the technology use questionnaire, and I was going to show you a copy of one of them, which is the video game addiction test, which is 14 items. I believe it's the 4th one down here. Each item is measured on a 5-point Likert scale from 0 never to 4 very often. And they're looking at here, as the title says, the addiction, so video game addiction, and they're trying to map it onto the DSM-5 proposed criteria. So these are the items that they use here. So the 14 items, and I'll read through a couple of them to kind of give you an example. So the first one, how often do you find it difficult to stop gaming? And I believe these are asked in the past year to correlate with the DSM-5. The second one is how often do you continue to use games despite your intention to stop? And the last one, how often do you game to forget about problems? And so this one is, I believe, has been validated, I think once. There was one validation study that was very strong. So it was definitely one that I wanted to pull out and show you here. Any thoughts on this test used to look at video game addiction? And any criteria you think might be missing?
Well, it's clearly geared towards students because it's asking about homework versus adults who can also be gaming quite a bit.
My reaction was also, what kid wouldn't want to rush through their homework to get to play video games? Right, so some of these I like and I think are really helpful in working with clients too. Do you find it difficult to stop gaming? Do you game specifically to forget about your problems? But then other ones, you're right, who are we to say that that's not a normative thing? I didn't play video games, but I didn't want to do my homework either, so,
And I think some of these could also be replaced for, are you on Instagram? Are you on Facebook? Are you, so we're using gaming, but there are also a lot of other things that we could kind of replace here with it. Okay, so internet gaming disorder is what is proposed in the DSM-5. So it's listed under conditions for further study, which means it warrants more clinical research before formalizing it as a mental disorder, which is kind of what we've been saying. It needs a lot more research. It's been proposed as a behavioral addiction and is most likened to gambling disorder. So a gambling addiction is how they've kind of operationalized it and thought of it. So the definition is persistent and recurrent use of the internet to engage in games, often with other players, leading to clinically significant impairment or distress as indicated by 5 or more symptoms in a 12-month period. And we'll show you those symptoms that are proposed. So it's 5 or more symptoms within a 12-month period. And those symptoms are preoccupation with gaming, withdrawal symptoms when gaming is taken away or not possible, such as sadness, anxiety, irritability, the tolerance, so they need to spend more time gaming to satisfy the urge, inability to reduce playing, unsuccessful attempts to quit gaming, giving up other activities, loss of interest in previously enjoyed activities due to gaming, continuing to game despite problems, deceiving family members or others about the amount of time spent on gaming, the use of gaming to relieve negative moods, and risks, so having jeopardized a job or relationship due to
And you can see already how the language used is very similar to the language used around gambling, right? So an inability to quit gambling. And I said to Carolyn, I was sort of like, my problem with some of this criteria is that we don't know that you should be stopping video games. So, the question becomes, does the person need to recognize that it's a problem? And it seems like, yes, that's the first problem with the criteria, is if they don't recognize that they have a preoccupation with gaming and things like that, they might never feel the need to reduce their gaming, and then they won't meet criteria for something like this. But also things like loss of interest in other activities. Well, if this is their new activity that they enjoy, again, is that something that isn't okay, right? So I have clients who play sports that have now a preoccupation with a new sport, and that's all they do, and they don't like the sport that they used to play. So who am I to say that that's, again, not normative? And again, we just don't know. And video games, again, they get a bad rap, I think, because of the studies that have been done with aggression, and because it is, focused on a computer for however many hours a day. But our expectation that we shouldn't be doing it, or that kids that are focused on it entirely, or adults that are focused on it entirely, are somehow wrong or doing the wrong thing, I think is also problematic.
Yeah, and I think that brings me to the next slide, is introducing the idea of a continuum here. So I think it's important when we look at gaming behavior to look at it as existing on a continuum. So I used pathological gaming as a reference point, since that's in the DSM. So normal gaming, like recreational, proportionate, causes no problems, versus excessive gaming, which is a behavior that is disproportionate but not necessarily problematic. And then pathological gaming, which is on the other extreme. So there's a loss of control, compulsion, continued use despite negative consequences. And this has been, as I said before, male adolescents. There's been a lot of kind of focusing in on male adolescents and their likeliness to show signs of pathological gaming.
And Ninja is an interesting example because he probably averages 10 hours a day gaming. I don't know, Ben, do you know how often Ninja streams? It's a lot. But he has come out, he's done interviews where he said, I have an amount of money in mind, and I'm going to do whatever I can to get to that amount of money. And then once I have reached that amount of money, I'm going to stop. Right? So he would not fit into these categories, at least for pathological gaming, because there's a complete sense of control. He games when he wants to, and he doesn't when he doesn't want to. And right now he's saying, as a part of my career goals and my life goals, I am going to spend as much time as possible making as much money as possible, and then I'll be done.
There is some research in the literature that talks about pathological gaming, where they approach it kind of differently. They say that the pathology is already there. That is why, like those kids already have psychological issues, and they seek these games to comfort them and help them feel better.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, that's how I feel in some ways about my clients, and I think especially it's easier to blame video games than it is to consider that there was a pre-existing issue.
It's kind of like they used to perceive gambling in the old days. Now they know that gamblers do have issues.
Exactly. Right.
Well, it's also pretty well known that kids who are on the spectrum and have trouble socializing, that gaming can be an incredibly important outlet for them to filter out all of the social cues they don't have to concern themselves with.
And a way to learn social skills that they, right, in a way that's much more comfortable.
To learn how to be on a team, to learn what it takes.
So ultimately, I think what we're all sort of getting.
Are they really on a team?
Yes, they are.
Physically there?
I mean, they're playing together, so they're. I mean, it's how you define physically, yeah.
Like right here. No.
I mean, sometimes, yeah.
They're not in the room together.
No, sometimes they are in the room together.
Sometimes they are. But sometimes
Oh yeah, sometimes they are. So a lot of kids I know.
Sometimes they are, but sometimes, I mean, like, I disagree.
Yeah, no, and you are in the majority. You're in the majority, so we're kind of, yeah.
So maybe you're not physically next to a person, but when you're playing a lot of multiplayer games, you have headsets on, so you're communicating with others using your voice and communication. You have to have strategies, and it's not just.
But there's a lot different. There's a way different level of anxiety when, like, if I'm going to argue with somebody, if I am in close proximity versus texting, or, I mean, it's a way different level of anxiety.
Well, that's kind of the point with a kid on the spectrum.
Because you can kind of create a hierarchy.
If they're not interacting at all, and they are able to interact in a role-playing game or, whatever category it is, they are learning some skills, and they are able to do it in a way that, doesn't make them feel incredibly overwhelmed.
And I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with it's a different level, but it's also being in person is also a different level of.
I'm not arguing that at all.
Yeah, and so I agree that it's a great introduction into developing those skills, but the skills that they're going to need to develop to be face-to-face is on a different level. But I agree, I think it's a great step in the right direction, but I don't think they should be...
Yeah, were you raising your hand there? Sorry. I saw you put your hand.
I just wonder if you would separate these gambling elements which are embedded in many games from the game experience in case of in order the criteria. So to my experience, a lot of games like League of Legends or Fortnite have some elements embedded, like buying chests and getting random stuff, and which also reinforces the urge to play, I think. And maybe, I'm just curious if you would separate this from the game experience, and
Well, so I just want to make sure I understand. So there's also part of video game experience is also they want you to keep playing, right? So embedding parts of the game that make it easier for you to not stop. Essentially, like Fortnite, from what I understand from my kids, is that they every 2 minutes, it's like if you lose, it's like there's another game in 3 minutes. So you don't learn how to wait, right? You don't learn tolerance, right? If you lose, even the experience of losing is different because you can play again in 5 minutes and things like that. So I think all of us, it's so hard when we come from this clinical background of what we understand to be best for people. Like socializing is a part of our lives, and it's skills that you're going to need. And so I don't disagree that there is something very different about being in person with someone than playing games and things like that. But I think what we don't know, again, is that question of which came first, right? The pathology or the video game usage. And so if someone who has no pre-existing concerns plays video games perhaps more than any of us would consider normal, is that going to have a negative impact on their abilities versus a kid who we want to be able to eventually go to college and be able to communicate and things like that? Is the video game usage prohibiting them from getting to that place because it's sort of a safety net? So all things being equal, you have two kids who are playing video games for 5-6 hours a day, right? How do we decide? So if the child was doing well in school, had friends over the internet, but also was hanging out with kids in school and otherwise, would we say that that's problematic? Or if the child, same situation, they're playing 5 to 6 hours a day, but they're struggling, they're not able to socialize outside of video games, then that would be problematic. And so I think the question, we don't know how much time, right? That's the problem with all of this. We don't know, both with Facebook, social media, the phones, things like that. We don't know the timing. And so what I like about this informal assessment is I think it gets at exactly what your concern is, right? Is if the video games become the be-all, end-all of your life, right? When you can only focus on it, like you're in school, but you're really thinking about when you can get back to Fortnite, when you are only able to communicate with kids, with other people over your video game, or you're fearful of when you go to a restaurant and you don't know how to interact because you're not used to doing it without the headset, that is when it becomes problematic. So I would argue that essentially maybe the time is not our biggest question right now, and I'm happy to talk about that and discuss it, but I think it's just so much harder to get into.
I'm from Canada, so there's one difference, and I'm also an administrator in an elementary school, so all of my experience is kids 13 and under. And I wanted to comment on the social aspect. So I understand playing with friends, but I see in the office so many students who come in because they've had an issue on the weekend in a game, and that communication piece where kids are hopefully learning how to communicate, and you may be on the spectrum and you may not be able to do that face to face, they're supposed to do that over a game, but that communication that's happening over the game, in my experience, is not the right type of communication, so it's not helpful.
Well, I think you're seeing the negative outcomes, which are going to happen everywhere, but the cyberbullying and things like that, you're going to see in game, which is, it's awful.
And don't get me started on Instagram and Facebook. But the other piece is I look at, a handful of kids who we've really honed in on, and this chart is really helpful because we have kids. I have a student who he's run around the school screaming, "Give me my computer, give me my computer." I've had a kid who's wanted to go home so badly to go play video games that he's kicked through a window. Like and these are kids who are 10 and 11 years old. And yes, there are other concerns with them, but I really like this because I can probably check off every single box for a lot of these kids.
Yeah, and again, I think this doesn't, it asks about timing, but it asks more about like, have you set limits and then not be able to keep them, right? Which indicates that you wanted something and were not able to follow through because of your inability to tolerate not playing anymore.
Well, and we incorporate it into their program. So we say, after a successful amount of doing A, you can have 10 minutes of your game. And we set a timer, and there's a timer in my office and on the kids' desk, and the EA has a timer, and it's still, the timer goes off. Right.
Just give me, just let me, I'm in the middle, right? And the hard thing I think about the timer too is that because the game is going to still be going, and so, but just, let me just finish and let me just get to the next thing. It's like the next thing could be in 3 hours, right? So it's a really good point, right? That, and another issue, right? The social communication, who's monitoring the social communication in the video game to be able to help. So what I like about what we can do is we do have the ability, right, to have our kids show us if they've recorded something on Twitch, and we can say, what did that interaction look like? How could it have looked a little bit different? Like, what could you have said? What do you think this other child heard that maybe then they responded in that way?
Do you think that, is there any work being done right now on regulation for children?
When you mean on limits and things like that? So
other than saying it's mature and no. That's.
This is a whole, this whole area is, there's just question marks everywhere, and not a lot of people are willing to walk into it.
Korea has a curfew, right? Korea has a curfew that if you're under 18, midnight, the games have to go off.
And they're the most successful players in the world.
That's what I'm saying. It's just kids can't regulate,
Right, exactly. You need to have parents kind of monitoring and helping to establish with anything. Even playing Monopoly all night isn't good for anyone.
I would feel so much better as a parent buying some gaming that was regulated somehow, that I could,
they do sell ways, there are ways to
turn off the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, there are ways that kids.
I would as a parent, but you know what I'm talking about as far as.
Yeah. This is a little, right, and this is a little outside of it, but I think also what happens is that then kids will say, yeah, but my mom is on her phone, all night, or my parents are watching TV. So when I have families like that, I say well, if there's going to be a limit, then everyone has to follow the limit. So
I don't agree with that. I am a parent. I know I have a different brain than, they do. Right. And
yes, and with phones and things like that, the inability to put down the phone, it persists past however old you are, and things like that. So yes, I agree that you are able to monitor when you want to stop watching TV and things like that. So the child goes to sleep, you're fine to do what you want, but you're also demonstrating things that they are not seeing in school, they're not seeing online, right? I get kids saying, but my friend is on, he's waiting for me to play, they can do whatever they want. So if you're modeling for the child, right? Nope. Listen, it's hard for me too. This person wants to chat with me, but it's family time.
But I get also, I'm a mom too, right? So I'm a mom. I have 2 kids that drive me a little crazy sometimes, but I love them because it's being recorded. I love them a lot. But there have to be hard guidelines, right? So you can only watch the iPad or watch your Paw Patrol, for this amount of time, but I'm still gonna be, I'm working. So I'm gonna be on my computer or doing things and things like that. But also having times where we all disconnect as a family, to connect together. So just making that an important emphasis and kind of value as a family where connection, when you really connect, is to kind of let go of all of that and kind of be in the moment together. And so kind of having all of those different things, and I think it looks different for different families based on if they want to have that disconnection time, or some parents have their own video game addiction issues as well. And so we usually don't get parents that are kind of perfect role models, and life comes into play. And so we're working in a messy world, everyone is, but trying to figure out what will work for each individual, but kind of coming up with some broad solutions would be amazing. Some broad guidelines and regulations would be so helpful and are so needed right now.
Yeah. Question, because this has come up where I've had families ask me, are there any specific programs to address someone where we know they're in their extremely problematic zone? And because I remember reading in a magazine on an airline, there was one place on the West Coast, but I don't know where. So if we had any of that, can you make recommendations?
Yeah, so I have the resources at the end that I'm going to show you. I'm going to jump forward a little. So the Arizona State University Center for Games and Impact was the best that I've been able to find online. They have impact guides for a lot of the most popular games, and they're really, really detailed. There's discussion, there's ways to kind of bring the game into real life, talk to your kids about it, figure out kind of how to communicate with them, set guidelines, and go through that together. So I would highly recommend you check that out. Their impact guides I found to be really great. They also have a newbie section, which is really great in breaking down all the different terminology and all the different types of games, and specifically so when you're looking at the impact guides, you're understanding what's going on. And then Common Sense Media also has some stuff beyond the reviews, but we'll have a little bit more information. But the most detailed I found were the impact guides. When you have someone presenting in any type of setting, it's really helpful to get more information about their video game play and what it looks like. And this is the best questionnaire that I found. And I found it in I think it's Child and Adolescent Psychiatry in the Media, which was a textbook. And I found this in the glossary, but I actually can't find this questionnaire anywhere. So I emailed the author, and hopefully if I find it, I will put it up there so that we can actually have it. But this is a copy of it, and it's the best that I've found. So it really goes through, it's a really great assessment of the types of video games you play, other activities that you're doing, your favorite games. So what's the first game you played? What is your favorite game now? What do you like best about it? Your favorite character? What do you like about him or her? It's a really great way to prompt some discussion, and then goes into social video gameplay. And so what is your favorite way to play? By myself, with friends in person, with friends online, with family? How do you contact friends to play? So how do you initiate? How do you get it to start? I don't. I text message, in-game messaging, phone call, other social media. So it really opens up discussion about gaming. Where do you play the most? How do your game skills compare to others? How often do you have problems or conflicts playing with others? Sometimes my play gets in the way of sleep, school, homework, friends, family. On social media, I don't use social media at all. I don't think any teen would write that. I watch, follow certain games only. I share my game progress. I play with multiple screens. Do you feel safe playing online? Does the internet feel more comfortable than real life? So I thought this was an awesome kind of way in terms of if you're meeting someone, and it could be an initial questionnaire, but if it comes up later on that gaming is a part of their life, a great way to kind of dive in and discuss it more if you're not super comfortable with video gaming, and even if you are, to figure out more about the function of gaming in their life.
So we wanted to talk a little bit, we've kind of alluded to this already, some of the therapeutic applications for video games. So I think the first one that's most commonly cited just is that the purposeful engagement of playing video games together, so that there is a social aspect, there's common goals. You have to, especially for the teams that are playing, they need to work together to decide what their strategy is going to be. And then they also need to navigate when there are disagreements and things like that, which, as we sort of discovered, a lot of people really struggle with, and that's why they need our help, right, to be able to navigate those areas. Practicing social skills and then hopefully generalizing them into real world applications. So Carolyn has down just this graded approach of, like it was mentioned before, if you can practice this in the game, can you take the next step and try to practice this in real life? I come from an exposure background, I'm sure many of us do, right? So what's the worst that could happen? You know, could you tolerate your distress if you've done it in the game? What do you think would happen if you did it in real life? And then also just having a relationship with the person that you are in the game and sort of having an identity around that. So I think that was the fascinating thing for me, and learning about the world of esports and gaming and things like that, is that a lot of these people have an identity that's based around their character. And that's not a negative thing. It means that they identify with something about the character, even if it's a fake thing, and that they can take that with them into their real life. So if they play in the game as someone who's a leader and who's in charge and who's directing everyone else, how do we have them, right? How do we have them take that into their real world and be that same type of person? So, you know, I liked that about the therapeutic applications in that article, was just about another way of taking that questionnaire that Carolyn had, helping to understand what they like about the video game that they play and who they are in the video game, and how we can help them take that into their real world.
And I think also, I was just going to bring in one thing, we both work with professional gamers, esports players, and one thing we've heard a number of times is that there also could be anxiety created with maintaining who you are in game, outside of game. And so it's almost like a celebrity. So when you're going to go and meet, you know, the fans, being that person that you are in game, which might be very different from how you are in normal life. So a lot of them are completely different kind of personas that they've taken on. And so how do you bridge these two identities can also be an issue that we see.
And even not on a professional level, but I've had kids say, you know, I'm a big deal in my game, right? I'm a big deal. Like, my friends expect me to be there. They expect me to help. And, you know, I'm supposed to be that person in my school as well, and helping them look at, you know, what's the reality of that, and could you be just who you want to be, and how do you maintain sort of that identity across, you know, fake life and reality. Yeah.
But I think it's just something that to think about when you're talking to people and thinking about gamers, is that they do have oftentimes a different identity in some ways online that you want to, which I think really, even if you look at Facebook and Instagram, like, you see the same thing. So that, you know, it might not be that unique to video games. I thought this was a great resource. So this was an article that looked at recently commercial video games as therapy. And so it provided a good kind of collection of all of these research studies that used commercially available video games in treatment. And so this is not, I've never seen this. Before, so I thought it was interesting to kind of pop up here so that you could take a look, and you could also download from the website so you could see some of the studies. But this is looking at games such as really anything, so any shooter games, role-playing games, PlayStation games, racing games, Star Wars, Zelda, so kind of a ton of different games and how they've been used in treatment for depression and anxiety and things like that. These are pretty small studies, so mainly like case examples.
I think it's dangerous for us to assume that if someone plays, you know, video games as addicts, because we just don't know that to be true. Right? And I hear what you're saying, that like we're taking these people at their word, but it's the same way, you know, I take all of my clients at their word, and sometimes they give me things that I'm grateful when there's some evidence to back it up. You know, that client I mentioned who was psychotic, he was talking to me about his father's bajillion-dollar business, and I found like a news article popped up that I was like, oh, thank goodness, right? He's not psychotic, right? This is true. And at the same time, you know, like, yes, we don't know Ninja personally and things like that, but, you know, some of our clients, you know, we have information that they're doing perfectly well, right? They're doing well in school, they have social relationships, their parents tell us they're doing well, right? And they're not in because of the video games, they come to us for other reasons and things like that, and video games just happens to be a part of their identity. I think where I get concerned, right, is if there's no flexibility about what this means, the same way that my clients who are athletes who have no professional sports athletes, there's no flexibility, I get concerned. That's when I would be concerned with an esport, someone who games and things like that, when there's no flexibility around their ability to play and what happens if I can't play and things like that.
So I think the end is just our resource. Yeah, I was just going to kind of provide, so we went through the one before this, which was on just general resources that I recommend online for more information about the games themselves. Then treatment, there's only that I could find, there are many treatment centers that have added in tracks for video game addiction. There are very few that are just for video game addiction. So these are the two most well-known in the US. So Restart was the first in Seattle, and Rise Gaming Recovery, which was created by ex-competitive gamers. And so it's really for gaming specific, these two centers. The researchers, so these are the kind of primary researchers that are cited in all the research in terms of gaming and the psychological correlates with it. These are, 5 of the main and most prolific researchers in gaming right now, and hopefully there will be many, many more to come, but this is a good place to start if you're interested in the research. This was the reference list. You can't even see it, but it is uploaded to the website for you. And our contact information on the, you can email us. We'd be happy to chat more about this. And we're both in Delray Beach, but travel a lot as well. So you hopefully will see more of us talking about gaming. And that is it for today. Thank you guys so much for tolerating us for 2 hours.